This broadcast is brought to you by the British Israel Church of God. The Watchman program. Evangelist and commentator Peter Salemi, bringing you the truth about today's world news in the light of Bible prophecy.
With the new President-elect Donald Trump now elected, where do we go from here as the days of the Obama administration is coming to a close, and then him handing over the reins over to Donald Trump? What will be America's new foreign policy, especially when it comes to Israel and the Middle East? I mentioned in other broadcasts that I believe that Trump would become the next president. And I give several biblical reasons why I do so, and the primary one being the prophecy of Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45. The prophecy of the king of the north. And as it says that it would be a man. So I knew Hillary Clinton wouldn't win the presidency for the United States, because this next prophecy says that the king of the north, which we have proved time and time again, is the president of the United States. It says he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. So it's a man. I also knew it would be Donald Trump, because he comes from royal blood of the kings of Scotland and England. And Almighty God promised that in Jeremiah the 33rd chapter, verse 17, that he promised that David would never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. And the house of Israel being Ephraim and Manasseh, Manasseh being the United States, and the throne of the house of Israel is the presidency of the United States of America. So he comes from royal blood. He comes from the line of the kings of Scotland and England, and we can trace those lines back to King David. So he is the son of David, ruling over the house of Israel. So on these reasons, I knew that Donald Trump would become the next president of the United States. Now let's go through Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 40 through 44. I've gone through other broadcasts where I proved to you that it is the president of the United States that heads up that great Northern Alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization called NATO, the greatest military alliance that the world has ever seen. And it is prophesied in Daniel the 2nd chapter, when he saw the great image in the plain, we see two phases at the feet and toes. We see the potter's clay phase and the miry clay phase. Now basically, Daniel said that in the days of these kings, the kings that are mixed with the miry clay, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, and that the stone which was cut out of the mountain without hands smashes the image at the 10 toes. And we read in Revelation the 12th chapter, verse 12 through 15, we see Jesus Christ fighting the beast at his coming. Those are the 10 toes, the 10 kings, mixed with miry clay. But we also see before that another phase called the potter's clay phase. And it says that you see the potter's clay with the iron, and that the kingdom shall be divided. And in Jeremiah the 18th chapter, verse 6, we see that the potter's clay is the house of Israel. Now that is the one vital key to understanding all Bible prophecy. And this is why we find error in all of these so-called evangelists that are out there that don't have the vital key that unlocks all Bible prophecy. And that is the identity of the United States and the British Commonwealth of Nations in prophecy. When we understand their identity in the biblical prophecies, then all of Bible prophecy becomes unlocked, and you can understand Bible prophecy. It says the house of Israel is the potter's clay. And who is the house of Israel? None other than the United States and the British Commonwealth of Nations and the peoples of northwestern Europe. So we see the potter's clay with the iron, and the kingdom shall be divided. That is a perfect fulfillment of NATO, of weaker and stronger nations in NATO. We see the kingdom is divided. There are two alliances of NATO and the EU, and the kingdom is divided because we see Israelite nations in the EU, and we see Israelite nations in NATO, and we see the iron nations in the EU, and we see the iron nations in NATO. So the kingdom shall be divided. And what we see here in Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45, it says, the king of the north shall come to his end before the tribulation. But we see the beast power. A lot of people think this is the beast power. We see the beast power come to his end at the end of the tribulation during the day of the Lord at the second coming of Christ. Revelation 17, verses 12 through 15. Obviously, in Daniel 2, as I mentioned, it says that that is the miry clay phase that comes to his end at the end of the tribulation during the day of the Lord, at the second coming of Jesus Christ. This plainly says that the king of the north shall come to his end before the tribulation, because it says in Daniel 12, verse 1, at that time. What time? Well, when the king of the north comes to his end. Shall Michael stand up, the great prince that stands for the children of your people? And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. Matthew 24, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. This is speaking of the great tribulation. So before the great tribulation happens, the king of the north comes to his end. Obviously, this is the potter's clay. And then when the potter's clay phase comes to his end, then comes the miry clay phase at the forming of the beast of Revelation, the seventh and final head, which has 10 horns, which is portrayed as 10 toes in Daniel 2. It is the miry clay phase. So this is the potter's clay phase that we read of in Daniel 11, 40 through 45. Now, who heads NATO? Because obviously the potter's clay phase is NATO. Who heads NATO? Who founded NATO? Who is the leader of NATO? Who is the major contributor of NATO when it comes to military equipment, money, funding, you name it? Well, the United States of America. They are the leader. The United States is the leader of NATO. So the king of the north, because this is the potter's clay phase, is the president of the United States of America. And we've proven to you in other broadcasts that verses 40 through 43 was fulfilled in the Gulf War of 1990 and 91. And I won't go into it in full detail because there are other broadcasts on our YouTube channel that you can look at that we go into great detail on Daniel 11:40 through 43. 11:40, Daniel 11:44, verse 44 shows the war on terror. And this is where we are right now. It says tidings out of the east and out of the north. And those two Hebrew words means Old Persia and Media. And that's where we found the Al-Qaeda network in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan are all in the areas of Old Persia. And there we found the Al-Qaeda network in Afghanistan, and it says tidings. Now it's not glad tidings, not good news, as the gospel is portrayed as glad tidings of the coming kingdom of God. These are tidings that trouble the king of the north. This is bad news. And we heard reports, we heard news, preaching out of there of jihad against the West, and it troubled us. 9/11 troubled us. The bombing of the USS Cole troubled us. The London bombings, the Madrid bombings. It troubled us, all because of these tidings, bad tidings, out of the east and out of the north, Afghanistan, from the Al-Qaeda network of jihad against the West, and it troubled the king of the north. And then it says that he, that's the king of the north, the president of the United States, shall go forth with great fury to destroy and to utterly make away many. Now, if you recall, when George Bush, when 9/11 happened, George Bush and the rest of the NATO allies invoked the Article 5 of their charter for the first time ever, that says that if you attack one, you attack us all. And NATO went out with great fury to destroy and to utterly make away many. This is where we are right now. Then comes verse 45. And this is how I knew that Donald Trump would become the next president of the United States. It says he, notice it's a man, it's not a woman. He shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, and those are military bases, military occupation, between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. That's the Negev desert and, of course, Jerusalem. So he goes into Israel. Now the context is, as many commentaries will tell you, the context is tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. So tidings out of the east and out of the north, out of Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan and old media, and this is where ISIS is right now, tidings out of there, and we receive tidings out of Iran right now of the destruction of Israel. We know that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism around the world, in Palestine as well. Tidings out of there are going to make the king of the north plant military bases in Israel. So Iran is going to most likely be the one to start preaching these bad tidings towards the west, towards Israel, and this is going to make Israel, it's going to make the king of the north, the president of the United States, plant military bases in Israel. So obviously this is a pro-Israeli foreign policy. Now when I come back, we'll go through other prophecies that show that we're going to see this king of the north have a pro-Israeli foreign policy, but also a pro-Christian policy that he will bring with him. We want to offer you this free booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy, free of charge, off our website, britishisrael.ca, and it'll explain Daniel the 11th chapter to you in great detail. If you want the hard copy of this booklet, Bill Petzinas will give you the addresses and phone numbers where you can obtain this free material.
To get your free literature, please write to us at the British Israel Church of God. Our Canadian address is 6 Hosted Crescent, spelled Hawstead Crescent, Brooklyn, Ontario, Canada. Postal code is L1M2M5. Our USA address is 171 West Barbara Avenue, Pahrump, Nevada. Postal code 89060. Or log on to our website at www.britishisrael.ca. Or if you'd like to reach us by telephone, Pastor Peter Salemi's phone number is area code 905-447-4415. Or myself, Bill Petzinas, at area code 416-898-7407.
All right, get that free literature downloaded off our website, britishisrael.ca, absolutely free of charge, and inform yourself of some of these prophecies that are about to take place. All right, in Isaiah the 19th chapter, here we see a prophecy about Egypt, and that Egypt is in an absolute chaos at this time. And in verse 17, it talks about the land of Judah, that they shall be a terror unto Egypt. Now, what is the time setting of this prophecy? Verse 20, it shows that they shall cry unto the Eternal because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, and a great one, and he shall deliver them. That's, of course, obviously, the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, who's being oppressed here? It's not the Egyptians, because it says that they, these people being oppressed, shall cry unto the Eternal. The Egyptians are Islamic. They're not Christian. Obviously, it's not the Egyptians. And in verse 21, it says, after, when Christ does come, it says, the Lord shall be known unto Egypt. So that happens after. So who are these people who are oppressed and are crying to the Lord for salvation? Well, let's get back up into verse 17. It says, the land of Egypt shall be the land of Judah, rather, shall be a terror unto Egypt. Now that Hebrew word for terror means properly to move in a circle. That is specifically a march in a sacred procession. So it's speaking of a march. And when was the last time you read in the Bible about a march in a sacred procession properly to move in a circle? Well, the days of Joshua, when the army of Israel were surrounding Jericho, and God created a miracle, and Jericho fell into the hands of the Israelites. So obviously these are troops that are going into Egypt. And then it says, let's skip on into verse 18. In that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan, and swear to the Eternal of hosts. And one shall be called the city of destruction. The Farrar Fenton translation has the town of salvation. Now, what was the language of Canaan? What was the language of Canaan in the days of Isaiah? Well, it was Phoenician. And of course, the European languages stem from the ancient Phoenician language. And this is before the tribulation, obviously, because in verse 20, it's at the second coming of Jesus Christ. Before Christ's coming, they're oppressed. That's the great tribulation. Now, before the tribulation, we see troops coming in to Judah. And who are these people? Well, it's the king of the north, NATO, the European, American, and English armies. Obviously, that these troops that we see in the land of Judah, verse 17, they speak the Phoenician language, which is the European languages. Obviously, this is the king of the north, NATO. That's the time setting of this prophecy. And they set up 5 cities in the land of Egypt, because in verse 16 we see Egypt is in all kinds of trouble, and obviously NATO's going into Egypt for humanitarian aid. Because it says one town should be called the town of salvation. Obviously, Egypt is going to let NATO in because of the chaos that's going on. And it's going on right now as we speak. And eventually, it'll get even worse. Now, notice, it says, they shall speak the language of Canaan and swear to the Eternal of hosts. One shall be called the city of destruction, the town of salvation. And in that day, there shall be an altar to the Eternal in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. Now, I want to read you what the commentaries say. It says here in Gill's commentary about the pillar and the altar, it says the phrase denotes a public profession of Christ and setting up of his worship. It is used in allusion to the patriarchs who, wherever they came, set up an altar to the Lord and worshipped him. Places of worship will be set up for Christ. Barnes Notes also agrees with this. And it says the altar is properly placed on which sacrifices are all offered according to the Mosaic law, but one great altar was to be erected for sacrifices. But the word altar is often used in another sense to denote a place of memorial or a place of worship in general. They read that in Joshua 22, 22, and 26. It says it means that the worship of the true God will be established in Egypt, and that certain places should be set apart for his service. And that's in Barnes' notes. So we see here that places of worship, Christian places of worship, are going to be set up in Egypt. Who else can do that but the Americans and the British peoples, NATO? So we're going to see them in Egypt setting up these cities, and then it says, and it shall be a sign and for a witness unto the Eternal of hosts in the land of Egypt. When we see these prophecies come to pass, God's going to bring them out, bring them bring them about to show people that the prophecies of the Bible are true and that God means what he says. And this is why we see a resurgence of Christian and Jewish worship in NATO, especially American and the British peoples. So then, God says this is a sign, and then it says, for they shall cry unto the Eternal because of the oppressors. Now they are oppressed. First we see NATO moving in, but then we see them oppressed. And why is that the case? Because NATO breaks apart. It says in Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45, he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. We see in the book of Obadiah, you can read it in the first chapter, that we see American and British troops, the house of Israel, in Jerusalem, and they are going into Jerusalem, but then NATO breaks apart, and they are there, they go it alone, without the NATO allies, and then they become oppressed. Because at that time, NATO breaks apart, and the miry clay phase comes, the beast that forms, and puts these troops into slavery and captivity. And you can read that in the book of Obadiah. So they cry to the Eternal because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, and a great one, and he shall deliver them. So Jesus Christ comes and saves Israel out of slavery and captivity. And you can also read that in Isaiah the 11th chapter. All right, in Isaiah the 15th chapter, verse 29, here we see a prophecy about O Palestinia, and it says that the rod of him, rejoice not thou, whole Palestinia, because of the rod of him that smote thee is broken, and that is Judah. They smote the Palestinians in Gaza, and they're not in Gaza any longer, and of course they are rejoicing because they're not in Gaza any longer, the house of Judah. But it says that they are broken. So more deadly times are going to come upon Judah, the Jews, more terrorism, more state-sponsored terrorism from Iran, and we got Hamas, and we got the wars are going to take its toll on Judah until they are broken. And when they are broken, because they are broken, then comes a smoke coming out of the north. Verse 31, howl, O gate, cry, O city, thou whole Palestinia, art dissolved. Now notice that's the same time setting as Isaiah the 19th chapter. We see Egypt dissolved. We see Egypt afraid and feeble and weak. And this is the same time setting here. O Palestinia, thou art dissolved, for there shall come from the north a smoke. Now that word smoke means a numerous army raising a dust like a smoke as they move along and coming with great swiftness. And that's in Gill's commentary. And the Farrar Fenton translation also has not alone, but in masses. So, and the Palestinians, as it says, as I mentioned earlier, it says they are dissolved, and it means here they are literally melted, fainted. They faint through fear, and that's the same language as Isaiah, the 19th chapter, verse 16 and 17. So obviously this is the same time setting. So come from the north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. And what shall one then answer the messengers of the nation? So here the Palestinians are going down to these troops that are coming in, and they're asking them why they are there. And then it says the answer is that the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. So here we see the people from the north coming down into Judah and establishing themselves there because Judah is broken. And they're establishing themselves there, so it's obviously a pro-Israeli foreign policy. They've come to protect Israel, to defend Israel. And also, as it says in Jeremiah, the 47th chapter of this same prophecy, it says, behold, verse 2, rise up out of the north, and shall be an overflowing flood, and shall overflow the land, and all that is therein, the city, and them that dwell therein. Then the men shall cry, and all the inhabitants of the land shall howl. And also, back here in Jeremiah the 46th chapter, verse 24, that prophecy about Egypt, this same prophecy that I read to you in Isaiah 19, Isaiah 46 says the same thing. It says, the daughter of Egypt, meaning the latter-end generation of Egypt, shall be confounded. She shall be delivered into the hand of the people of the north. So that is the king of the north in Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45. So here we see the king of the north having a pro-Israeli foreign policy to protect Israel. Israel's going to go through some bad times in the future of terrorism, of Iran, the threats from Iran, the wars and so on with the Palestinians, till Judah is broken, and the king of the north, NATO, shall come to his aid to protect Judah. Now, these are these main points that we find in these biblical prophecies. The major points are that we see a pro-Israeli and Christian policy in this king of the north. We also see that the king of the north is not popular with his allies, and they break up the alliance. As it says, he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Jeremiah the 30th chapter, verse 14, it says, and let me just go there right quickly. Jeremiah 30 and verse 14. It says, all your allies, the Moffat translation has, all your allies have forgotten you, they seek you not. Or other translations have, they care nothing for you. So this alliance, this king of the north, is not going to be very popular with his allies, and the alliance breaks apart. And of course, protects Israel. So we're going to see this king of the north is going to be one who's going to come and protect Israel from Iran. Most likely Iran. Now, we're going to show you some clips of Donald Trump saying certain things about Israel and about Iran and about Christianity. We've put a bunch of clips together, and also about NATO. We put a whole series of clips together to show you what he says about all these topics that we have covered here in the biblical prophecies. Take a look at this clip.
Mr. Trump, thank you so much for being here tonight. Mr. Trump, in a recent interview with the Washington Post, you said that the U.S. should become a diminishing presence in NATO.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that the U.S. should start to withdraw their world presence from NATO, and what would you change about the organization so that we could remain involved?
Let me tell you, NATO is obsolete. It was 67 years, or it's over 60 years old. It is, many countries, doesn't cover terrorism, okay? It covers the Soviet Union, which is no longer in existence. And NATO has to either be rejiggered, rechanged, changed for the better. I'm not saying the other thing that's bad about NATO, we're paying too much. We're spending a tremendous billions and billions of dollars on NATO. NATO is obsolete. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be rejiggered and it can't be fixed and made good, or
and for you,
it's
that's
possible.
Largely a financial component that when you talk about rejiggering,
we're paying too much. You have countries in NATO, I think it's 28 countries. Okay. You have countries in NATO that are getting a free ride, and it's unfair. It's very unfair. The United States cannot afford to be the policeman of the world anymore, folks. We have to rebuild our own country. We have to stop with this stuff. And they're ripping off the United States, and they're ripping you off. I don't care. I don't want to do that. Either they pay up, including for past deficiencies, or they have to get out. And if it breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO. I love Israel and honor and respect the Jewish faith and tradition. And it's important that we have a president who feels the same way. For me, respect and reverence for Judaism is personal. My daughter Ivanka and my son-in-law Jared are raising their children in the Jewish faith, always reminding me the important values and lessons we learn about leadership, resolve, and families in Jewish tradition. My administration will stand side by side with the Jewish people and Israel's leaders to continue strengthening the bridges that connect not only Jewish Americans and Israelis, but also all Americans and Israelis. Together, we will stand up to the enemies like Iran, bent on destroying Israel and her people. Together, we will make America and Israel safe again.
Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital if he's elected. The promise was made during a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It marks a potential dramatic shift in U.S. policy, with it being a highly contentious issue between Israel and the Palestinians.
Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump said Monday, March 21st, that he would move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem if he wins his bid for the White House in November. For years, there has been bipartisan support for legislation to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. However, it's a break from 2 decades of bipartisan White House policy. In doing so, the Trump administration would be recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which has long been a delicate issue in U.S.-Israel relations. Both Israel and the Palestinians claim Jerusalem as their capital city. However, the U.S., like the United Nations, continues to view it as an international city, arguing that its status should be determined by negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Speaking to CNN on Monday, Trump said of moving the embassy, quote, "There's nobody more pro-Israel than I am. We have to protect Israel." For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
So let me state this right up front. A Trump administration, our Christian heritage, will be cherished, protected, defended like you've never seen before. Believe me.
All right, notice those main points in those clips that we just showed you. Donald Trump says that that the United States cannot afford to be global cop any longer, that NATO should either pay up or we get rid of it. He also says that NATO is obsolete. He also says that Jerusalem, he's going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which is very interesting because Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45 specifically notes that Jerusalem is going to be protected, and to put an embassy in Jerusalem is recognizing that Israel, that the United States recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Israel's possession. Now, how is Iran going to feel about that? Not to mention the nuclear deal with Iran. He's got to deal with that. We'll see in the other clips that he says he's going to protect Israel. He's going to stand up against Iran for Israel. He says he's going to protect the Christian heritage of the United States, and that Judaism is very close to him because his kids are being brought up in Judaism. And I also read to you a newspaper article from faithwire.com called "Donald Trump Makes Major Moves Involving Israel Just Days Before the 2016 Election," showing you that many Christian leaders across America, he signed a deal with many of these people about Israel and to protect Israel and so on. So when we look at all these clips and everything that we have showed you, does Donald Trump fit the profile of the King of the North? Well, absolutely. All that needs to happen now is for him to take action and fulfill these prophecies. Now, the one thing we're going to have to ask ourselves right now, if these prophecies come into its full fulfillment with Donald Trump, we're just going to have to ask the logical question: is Donald Trump going to be the last president of the United States of America? Because it says that when NATO breaks apart, and then comes the rise of the beast, the miry clay phase, then comes the great tribulation. And it's Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. The end of the United States, the British Commonwealth of Nations, and the peoples of northwestern Europe. The end of these nations, they are going to go into slavery and captivity, who's ever left from the war. And think of it, also is, it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. Does Europe like Donald Trump? No. Does China like Donald Trump? No. And Numbers, the 24th chapter, verse 24, it says that China will give a deadly blow to NATO, the United States, and her allies. And that blow will shatter, will break up NATO. So he's not popular with China. He's not popular with Europe. He fits the profile of the King of the North to a T. So we have to ask ourselves, is Donald Trump, if he fulfills these prophecies, is he going to be the last president of the United States of America? Get this free booklet, The Middle Eastern Prophecy, free of charge, off our website, britishisrael.ca. This is Peter Salemi saying goodbye, friends, and I'll see you here next time on the Watchman program.